Oh, it's really hot. It's really hot. Delicious. But not as delicious as Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each and every Tuesday we bring you a brand new fresh photography tutorial. I didn't know what I was doing with that one, and it sort of got away from me a little bit, if I'm totally honest with you. Anyway, let's dive into this week's Tutorial Tuesday, where we're going to talk about 3 tips to make you a better photographer. Now, these are not just generic go out and shoot at sunset, that sort of thing, tips that you see all over YouTube. These are 3 tips that I genuinely use and have used to improve my photography and specifically to improve my skills as a photographer. And instead of just waffling on about nonsense and making silly jokes, let's just dive into it. So the first tip, which has helped me so much to grow as a photographer, is to try new genres of photography, to really push myself out of my comfort zone and do things that I've never done before when it comes to taking photos. So we've probably all experimented a little bit with landscape photography, portrait photography. There's probably a few things that we've all at least dabbled in, even if it's not your favorite kind. But there's lots and lots of different genres to pick from, and you can learn so much by diving into each one. And I've found so many different times that something that I learn from trying one type of photography then spills over and makes me a better photographer at a different genre. Now, the easiest example for me to immediately pick from is astrophotography and then nighttime low light photography. So astrophotography is something that I was always keen to get involved with, to learn a little bit, to get that kind of photo of the Milky Way and stuff like that. And I practiced at it. I went out and shot photos up on Beachy Head, kind of around the South Downs, at midnight, at 1 a.m., at 2 a.m. It was super spooky. I'm not going to lie to you, it was super spooky. But I got the photos and eventually I became better and better. I learned a lot about how to focus on the stars, the shutter speed kind of rule, the rule you want to use to capture those kinds of photos, how to get the right kind of exposure, when to go out, when not to go out, how things like the moon affects it, all of that kind of stuff. I learned it all, I understood it all, and I started getting better photos until eventually I got this photo, which really is the photo that I was really trying to capture. And then I got a few different photos that I'm actually really, really happy with. But those skills that I learned shooting astrophotography were able to transfer over really nicely when it came to shooting photos of a car, a friend's car, after dark, when it got darker, when it was actually the middle of the night, to be honest with you. I was able to apply a lot of the same rules that I used to capture photos of the stars, to overcome the fact that it was very dark, to capture photos of this car. And it meant that I was able to come away with photos like this, which I can't tell you, I'm very, very happy with. I'm really, really happy with. And that was the first time I'd actually tried shooting a photo of a car like that. I wanted to capture the atmosphere, I wanted to get the different lighting, I wanted to get all that kind of stuff in there. And it was the knowledge of the astrophotography that made it possible. Similarly, wildlife photography has really taught me a lot about tracking moving subjects, about how to focus, and about how to do things like panning photography, which meant when I went to Goodwood Festival of Speed, I was able, again, to take those panning shots of cars that I wanted to capture. Now, that's something that can be really difficult. It can be something that takes a bit of trial and error, a bit of practice. But I was able to come away with a number of good usable shots using that technique, even though I'd never really done it before when it came to cars. That was also my first time shooting cars in the daylight, right? I'd only actually shot a car at night, and certainly moving cars like this, moving quickly, was my first real go at it. But I was able to use the skills from wildlife photography and apply them to fast-moving cars. It's a fast-moving subject, right? It might not be a bird, it might not be a deer, but it is fast-moving, and that's basically the same. But this is true of all kinds of different things. You can learn so much about product photography by doing food photography. You can learn so much from portrait photography, which then applies to all kinds of different genres. When you start to experiment with capturing different moods and telling a little bit of a story with your portraits, well, that can then transfer to taking photos of pets, of dogs, of animals, where you're doing more of a portrait than you are just a shot of your dog. I have learned so much from taking portraits of friends, of family. I used to take so many portraits of Matilda, and that really helped me to be able to take better photos of my dog, Nala, because I'm not just trying to get a technically correct photo, I'm trying to capture some kind of emotion, some kind of story with the photo. I've learned that from the portrait stuff that I've done in the past. Even something like street photography, which for me is one of the more challenging genres of photography. And that's because I don't like getting up in people's faces. I don't like making it awkward, taking someone's photo when they're not expecting it, trying to capture that moment. So, maybe you ask for permission afterwards, and it could be a whole thing, right? But by doing it, by pushing myself out of my comfort zone, I become a more confident photographer. And that ultimately leads to being better at photography. You understand your equipment more, and that confidence leads to being able to capture more interesting shots and better shots. There's a lot to be gained by trying out a totally new genre, even if it's a genre you've not thought about doing before, you don't think you'll be interested in. Even if you try it once, you might learn something from that genre that you can apply to the genres that you love. And it's a really, really interesting way of growing as a photographer. Okay, so the second tip that I want to talk about is something that is really useful, especially if you're a little bit earlier in your photography journey. And this is to try and copy someone that you admire, copy their style, copy a specific photo, try and recreate something yourself. Now, that might not sound like the best thing in the world, but actually, this is a great way of essentially learning what kind of techniques they've used to capture the photograph in that way. How have they lit something, right? How have they composed something? How have they captured the mood or the feel? What was important in that photograph, which means you can recreate that and learn about the lighting, about the composition, and about what was important. This is exactly like if you're learning a musical instrument and learning a song, right? You don't always have to write your own songs. You can learn someone else's song to improve at the piano, the guitar, the drums, whatever it might be. That's exactly the same with photography. If you try to recreate someone else's work, you're going to learn so much about their process of getting to that point. How did they do it? And then you can start applying those things that you've learned to your own work, right? To your own creative, interesting, amazing piece of art. For example, we do a lot of editing tutorials here on this YouTube channel, and you could literally copy how I edit a photo in order to get a similar kind of result. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to look perfect on your photo, but if you do that, you're going to understand the process a lot better for how I edited it, and therefore how you can get a similar kind of result from it. Then you can tweak it, you can change it, but you've learned so much about how to do it. And that is a big, big step forward in learning photography and being a better photographer. And the last tip number 3 that I want to talk about is something we actually did a full Tutorial Tuesday on recently, but it's about revisiting some of your old photos. If you go back and look at photos from a few years ago, right? Or even just a year ago, 6 months ago, and how would you do things differently? How would you have changed how you take the photo? Is it the settings? Is it the composition? Is it the lighting? I have a lot of examples of this where, for example, I used to shoot with too much of a wide open aperture, right? Just a lot of the time I would shoot with too much of a wide open aperture, and it would mean that not enough of whatever it is I'm taking a photo of is in focus. So for example, a lot of product photography, I just wouldn't have a deep enough depth of field. Maybe food photography, similar sort of thing. I wouldn't have enough depth of field there to make sure everything is comfortably in focus, because I'd be thinking, well, I want to make sure there's enough light. I want a nice, beautiful kind of out of focus area. Whereas what I would be thinking now is the product is the most important thing here. It's really what we're trying to take a photo of. It all needs to be in focus, obviously. That's obviously the most important thing. And that is something that I've learned by revisiting that old work and realizing, okay, f4 wasn't cutting it. Or I've zoomed in too much here and only shot f4. If I'm going to zoom in that much, I need to actually stop down. Or don't zoom in as much, go for a slightly wider focal length, and that's going to help as well. That goes for composition as well. I used to really obsess over the rule of thirds, actually. I used to put things into the rule of thirds, so on that side line or one of the horizontal lines, I would just put it on there just to put it on there because I thought, well, that makes me a good photographer. Whereas that's not always the case. And sometimes when I revisit those older photos, I now realize, okay, actually, this would have been better just centered up, right? Sometimes that is the best way to take the photo. It might not seem like the most creative and most interesting way to take the photo, but sometimes it just is the best way. And so looking back at those older photos, I've learned a lot about what I should have done and what I would do now. And that can just make you a little bit more aware of that in the moment. When you're taking the next photo, you'll definitely have those thoughts in your head and you'll just correct yourself based on the past. And that's a big thing as well. Those are 3 things that I genuinely have learnt so much about photography from. Those are 3 tips I use all the time. I try to actually consciously think about those 3 different tips, revisit them, and actually apply them to myself to become a better photographer. We're all learning. We're all learning all the time. And that's the fun part about it, right? We can always get better, and I can't wait. And that's why it's so exciting to think about, what photos are we going to take in the future? There are some great photos we've taken in the past that I'm really excited about. Some photos I have taken in the past. I'm really happy with them. But I know I'll take better photos at some point. And that's exciting. That's very exciting. Now, do you have any other tips? We've obviously just scratched the surface there with 3 tips there, but those are my 3 ones. They're my 3 big ones. But I'd love to know, do you have any other tips that help you become a better photographer, to really improve your photography? Anything that you want to share down in the comments? We have such a good community here, and you guys have some really, really insightful stuff. So I'd love to hear from you guys if you have any additional tips to help us all improve our photography. Otherwise, of course, there'll be a full list of kits used for this video and a bunch of these photos down in the description, so you can check that out for yourself. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well, because there's new content all the time. New tutorials every week, reviews, all kinds of stuff. I will see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.